So between what the land bank is doing, what the city is doing with child block builder, what some of the suburban communities are doing around tax recapture of properties, they have been able to figure that out, right? How to get the price of the land down. So that's good. And then the other thing is that we've got to have the financing mechanisms out there to allow people to buy these houses. And so again, we have FHA and we have these different tools that are out there, but there's still a bit of a bias in here. We're still heavily reliant on credit scores. We're still very heavily reliant on, I can look at certain zip codes and, be predictive around who's getting approved and who's not getting approved. So we have that bias in the system. So, I mean, so really, we've got to really address these systems, and it's going to take some courage, and it's going to take um, um, forward-thinking folks to address that. Right now, there is a state commission, a national commission looking at appraisal bias because that's real. And it has the same sort of effect where I find a house in a neighborhood, but I can't get it to appraise to the level that it will get financed or to that pricing. Neither the person has to bring that price of the house down, or I have to forego it and go get something else because I can't afford it. Um, all of these different systems that we have are legacy systems that were built on a faulty foundation. And at some point, we've got to wipe that foundation and start anew if we really want to see a change in how things are done in this country.
You said a mouthful.
Yeah. And it's tough. That's the tough thing about it is it's not that it can't be done. It's just that the path of least resistance is to keep trying to fix and band-aid where we currently are. Instead of taking a step back and saying we've got to rethink how this is done. That's the most difficult thing for the political class to think through because it requires courage, and there's a chance that you may be wrong, and then you're on the wrong side of that. So the easiest thing to do is just to say, hey, let's just keep going with what we do, and on the margins, let's see what we can make improvements on. But we've seen in times that approach just hasn't yielded great results.
So, Rob Rose, are you saying, when you say these forward thinking people, are you talking about policy and that people should, like, find people who can go to Washington, D.C. and talk to government and our local government here to change these policies that make it more affordable and equitable?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's
Are you talking people like J.R. Fleming who needs to, we need more people like that who is activists, advocates. I mean, you said it so eloquently and so professor and high level and high education. It's like forward thinking people, do they know what that means? So
yeah.
basically, to dumb it down, you're saying we need some housing advocates, some policy people who can go and address what's happening on different levels.
And we need allies, right?
Yes.
I mean, so because I think we have no shortage of advocates and folks who feel this way, right? But what we also need is we need some allies there that understand it and will find a way to champion these ideas and make sure that they get put into legislation and get put into practice, right? So when these grant opportunities come along or when this money is flowing through, we know exactly how we're going to use it. So, for example, I do applaud, Mayor Johnson for saying, hey, we're going to move off of the over reliance on TIF for housing. Let's go to the capital markets and get the bonding that we needed. Now, to his credit, he did that. We know that the amount is woefully way under what's needed. 1.25 billion sounds like a lot, but over a 10-year period, that's not a lot. But it is a step in the right direction, and it does say here is what's needed to be able to sort of break out. So let's get away from what we have been doing, which we know didn't work, at least give something else a try that could yield a different and more meaningful result.
I think people know what they don't know. And this is not me patting you on the back, but it's like you need 10 more of you. The same way, aspiring developers may not know the hiccups, not even the hiccups, the hurdles. It's like, hey, we need to change some policies. The same way some folks didn't know that redlining was happening. The way
Mhm.
folks just like, damn, I just can't get a house because it won't appraise out properly. So it's like we're having two conversations that's relevant of like needing, whether it's a lobbyist or an ally or all of the above, to understand like it shouldn't be this hard to develop, to build, to buy a home, but it's some broken policies or not fair policies that's in place that needs to be addressed. Am I right?
Well, it's ultimately about control, and
Oh,
this is where we're finding the disconnect. No matter who's in power, Democrats or Republicans, right?
mhm.
Um, it's about ultimately control and who feels or who doesn't want to have the loss of that control. And so some of the things we're talking about require a relinquishing of that control. And that's just the hardest thing in the world. So someone to say, I'm going to cede this over to another group. I'm going to give this responsibility over. I'm going to, the potential millions and billions that can be made, I'm going to find a way to distribute that amongst these other folks. We're fighting the human condition on that. That's the fight, right? About it. So, it's on a small scale, it's the fight that I had at the land bank to say, here's how we're going to increase the number of people working with the land bank and really having a fight to say, I want to take this application and change it because I think this is going to open things up that people don't have to come in with 2 years of tax returns in order to see a property. Small thing, but I ran into that protectionism that says, well, if I do these things, then I protect myself and I can stand against any sort of political attack, as opposed to this is what we need to do to really be impactful and to help people. So that's the tough thing. What you hope to see is like in time, like the folks that are now the junior folks on the team, the people that are most impacted by what we're saying, at some point, they become the elected officials. They become the senior folks of these organizations. They take that and they say, okay, here's how we're going to implement some of these changes. When I'm now running the organization, I want to make these different changes because now I see the effect that it could have. I mean, that's what you are seeing and hope to see as we continue on this journey, which is why it's still important for us to have these conversations because it may not be us, it may be my daughters, right? It may be the folks behind them that are actually able to have this conversation and have it make sense, or the sensibilities that they have 40 years from now align with the principles that we're talking about now, right? So that's because if you think back to the struggle that we've gone through, if you think back 100 years, where we are now and the sentiment that we have now, these are some of the things that were coming out during the Harlem Renaissance, right? These are sentiments that were being expressed, Booker T. Washington, W.E. Du Bois, the conversations they were having, that we're now just starting to see the realization of some of those dreams. So that's why we've got to keep pushing, even if we don't see the result right now. We have generations behind us that we can impact and influence with the words that we're saying.
Speaking of which, of legacy and community leadership, and June is National Homeownership Month, right?
Right, right.
And we oftentimes hear that homeownership is the path to generational wealth, yet many Black families, many Black individuals are hesitant to buy, whether it's from, past trauma or fear of investment, or disinvestment. How do we change that narrative, and how do we get Black people to invest in their own communities? We see individuals, and I've talked about this at least three different times in the last, episodes of my peers, fellow millennials who would rather buy, rent a home, rent an apartment for $2,500 instead of putting down that investment specifically in their own neighborhoods. And it's like, how do we change that narrative? How do we get individuals to invest in their own communities instead of watching and looking and say, oh, what are they doing over there with that vacant building?
So part of it, and at the risk of offending you or anyone else that has said,
Speak, speak.
but I think that part of the issue here is this narrative that home ownership is the quickest path to wealth. Here's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's not a part of the wealth building component, but if you think about our ancestors and why they had a home because it represented stability. and it was a base of operations. It was their oasis. They wanted a home so that they could raise a family, so they could have peace, so they could have a piece of ownership. And the ownership wasn't to build wealth, the ownership was for peace of mind, right? I think, part of it is, when you look at a home as an investment, it's a poor investment. You run the numbers on it. The home itself isn't the investment from a monetary standpoint. I think what you're investing in is your mental health. You're investing in that feeling of security, that feeling of belonging to a community. Those are the things that you're really getting from it. It may appreciate, it may not. I mean, studies have shown that if you're in a majority black neighborhood, you're not seeing the same appreciation as the rest of the nation. So from that standpoint, I think we have to start rethink about what it is to build community and to have a stake in that community and to be a part of that. Of course, once you have that, it does provide a good foundation for other things that you want to do that can help to build wealth. But I think, for my daughters, a house represents stability. They don't think of it as an investment. They think of it as a place, as a respite, as a place that they can recharge, a place they can be themselves, a place that they can be express, and then you live, worship, and work in that community, and you have a ownership stake and a piece of that, because part and parcel with that, right, is also participating in the systems that we have. How many people shirk jury duty, right? They just, I gotta get out of it. And I'm saying I understand the inconvenience of it, but it's one of those systems that affect us so greatly.
Yeah,
We don't want to be a part of it.
yeah,
How many people don't vote? Don't see the utility of it. It's a system that is there to help to affect change. And so, the focus has to change. I think that's part of it. The other piece of it right now is the economics, just don't work. If you're talking about in the 60s, you could buy a house for $3,000, $5,000,
wow,
so you could have a job paying you, $6 an hour and still reasonably afford a house and still be able to get into these things. It's when we let Wall Street get in and juice it up with all of their leverage and all their debt and everything. Now we have these prices that are just out of control. So the economics have changed for the millennials that are now getting, really entering into the home buying space. Now that you guys are starting to turn 40, it's a different, it's a different field than when you were 25, right? Um, but the economics are also, different, and there's a recognition of that. But to your point, the other part of it is you think back to our ancestors, they called it a sacrifice, right? At the risk of having a new car or taking vacations or whatever, they prioritize having a place to build a family, right? And we don't have that same, we're not willing to make that same sacrifice to say, you know what, first let me secure a home, let me have that. And then from there, I can have my experiences, I can do my trips, I can do my vacations. So part of it is if there's a way for us to recapture what we know works, that may be part of it. Again, that may be Pollyannish to say, but you know, sometimes every now and again, people knew what worked. Everyone knew what worked, which is why they put systems in place to fight against we knew what worked, right? And what worked was people prioritizing home ownership. You know, Again, one of the things I talk to my people outside of Texas, and I'm like, you don't realize when they talk about all of the violence and all the stuff that's happening in Chicago and everything. I'm like, this is a concerted effort to make the city this way, right? Because it was just the 60s that where people were trying to move into Cicero and houses got bombed, right? King walking down Marquette Park got attacked, right? You know, this is a place where that violence was put upon people trying to make a change. So what do you think happens over a generation where I keep getting my head knocked, firebombed? Frank Williams, right? And what happened when he moved to Beverly and his house got attacked, and this was in the 70s, right? And so at some point, then what happens to a people when you repeatedly try to move to this part of town or to break this barrier, to be the first here, to be the first there, and you keep getting attacked like that, at some point, what we have now is the result of that, right? So one, we've got to own up to that. I mean, when I moved here, I moved to Chicago in 2010. One of my neighbors was George Wilburn when I lived down on the Gold Coast. And he was telling me about the lawsuit that he was involved in because he went to buy a house in Bridgeport.
I was just going to say, I remember.
And right. And that was 2010
Hmm.
with someone that certainly had the financial means to do so, but still was fighting that fight in Chicago to change and to be inclusive in that regard. So we've got to understand that. Well, how do we combat that? We combat that by going back to what we know works, which is let's define our communities, let's own a piece of it. Let's take place in these systems that were created as Americans for us to take a part of, to take a part in. And let's find a way to own it and have some ownership of it. Because when you go to different neighborhoods, they own that neighborhood. They're going to show up at community meetings to tell you what they don't want. They're going to protest. They're going to be vocal about it, right? We joke about the Karens, but the Karens of the world are at least out there trying to protect what they feel is theirs, right? And we just don't, we need to have the same pride of ownership for what's ours. And if that makes us angry Black people, if that makes us agitators or whatever, so be it, because everyone else is doing it to protect theirs. Everyone else is doing it to make sure that their interests are protected. And if we aren't doing that, or if we give that over to a select group of people and they don't have our interests at heart, then how do we expect for things to be better?
I'm screaming in my brain, in my head, because so much I want to say. I know we don't have so much time, right? I want to say, is that why they put so many nice, shiny, affordable, beautiful apartments in our neighborhoods instead of incentivizing us to be homeowners or home buyers? Like if I see one more beautiful, state of the art, affordable housing unit, and some of our own people, our own Black, colleagues facilitate that narrative. Home ownership is just not for us. Is the investment's just not there? And I was just like, what are you doing? What are you saying to our people? I'm not a socialist, so the government shouldn't take care of us. We should fight to strive to want to own a piece of our own land. But you see all
Right.
these beautiful, affordable, nice, gorgeous apartment complexes with the nice community room, and it's like the behind it is like it's going to be open to the community. It's like that would have been better if you just created 10 new homes.
Right. I mean, and the thing is, we can do both, right? There is a group that absolutely needs a rental. So affordable rental is an absolute need in these communities. So no one's begrudging that. It's just what we don't see is the balance, right? We don't see then, like you said, the creation of these homes to be able to do some infill housing to say, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to do this and that, and we're going to use that same capital, right? Because we'll be able to subsidize this with that. Part of it, I think, it's just there is no real brain power put behind how to do it, right? We have developers that are willing just to pay a bonus into a fund to get the density they need than to actually take that money and create the housing. One of the things that I believe is Alderman Burnett really pushed a lot of developers in his board. Don't just pay that density bonus, actually create the housing, within the ward so that we could have some of that housing. Because what we need is housing. We don't need more money in a fund to subsidize rent. We need some, home ownership. And so it takes that sort of persistence, because right now for all the challenges that we talked about, we know that building a house isn't a money maker, right? But what if I have a business in which, I mean, there's a lot of businesses that are out there in which they do something because it's not a money maker, right? Now, if you have a gas station, every time you sell a gallon of gas, you lose some money, right? You sell the gas to get people there to buy the store, to buy the goods and services in the store, because the gas itself is losing money. So can we have a business that does something where building the houses may not be maybe a loss leader, but it's also got a social dividend and it can also drive other things that you're trying to do. So I've never understood, for me, if I had a grocery store, it would also be behooving to me to say, hey, if I'm gonna build this grocery store, how can I find a way to build housing? Because I can build my own demand. I can build the housing and then put the grocery store in, and I know I've got customers here, because I'm helping to build up that neighborhood. But it takes people in those positions to have that thought to even ask the question, what's possible, right? Because if you think about again, what's innovation? Innovation typically is solving a problem, and the problem that they're solving for, most times people have never asked the question, can it be solved? Or is there a problem that we really, really should spend some time trying to address? And I think for housing, there's just not been enough people focused on that. The people that have the means to say, is there a way for us to address this in a meaningful way, right? And we've seen models of it, right? We've seen what happened in Pullman back when they had the Pullman porters and they built a town around that work, you know what I mean? In terms of being able to create the housing so that people that work there are able to live and work in that area. Again, not perfect, but it gives you some insight to say, if I'm able to create a destination, am I also able to create housing around that so that I can give people the housing that they need or provide the housing as well as be able to provide the goods and services? I just think we just lack a creativity and a desire to solve these problems, and that's half of it, right? We'd rather use that creativity to figure out how to go to space, how to get to the bottom of the ocean. Rather use that creativity to figure out how to make a piece of glass, talk to people, rather than saying, how can we take this and make people lives better.
This is so profound, and I'm gonna just put it out there. We're gonna write a book together about this because
All
this is
right.
going back to home ownership and what you just said. It wasn't until you articulated that it clicked. I'm a millennial, 40, 41. And, in our prior conversation was just talking about some of the housing issues. And I was just like, it's just so easy to just move back home. But the statement you made about what we saw in the 60s, the 70s of our parents and grandparents buying a home because it was a respite, it was our safe haven, it was solving the problem of keeping the family together. And I thought about it, right? It was almost similar to the story of Michelle Obama, of how she grew up and how they never took vacations, but they owned their home. And I thought about the same thing. My mom bought a home. She was trying to solve a problem in Inglewood. And I was like, we're staying in Inglewood. We moved right around the corner. But this problem she was trying to solve was like, I have 4 children. We need to get out of this apartment. I'm sick of them being on the same level. And I remember it clicked in my head. I used to tell him, I'm like, I want my own room. I got tired of sharing my room with my sister who was 7 years older than me. And, for a long time, I was like, we live in Inglewood. Never thought that I would be now the good in Inglewood queen. It's good in Inglewood, it's good in the neighborhood, right? Like, yeah, I live in the hood, but we own our home. And
Right.
growing up, we never took a vacation, never was a vacation, but we were homeowners. I had a backyard, I had my own bedroom. That was the problem that my mom was trying to solve, as well as, building that generational wealth. And similar to, Michelle Obama would talk about, we didn't go on vacations. We made ends meet, but we owned our home. Her mom talked about, we had our home. We sacrificed going on vacations or moving to the suburbs to make sure we stayed as a close knit family. And so that I wish, to your point of we would spend more brain power thinking about solving that problem, keeping families together and not separating the Black families. But that's what I wanted to share. And the other statement that you made, that said it didn't dawn on me until you said it, like, millennials are not necessarily buying homes because it is avoiding a certain responsibility or buying into a system, as you just talked about jury duty. I avoid jury duty. I have fellow millennials who avoid home ownership because that forces you to be an adult. It forces you to say, nope, I'm gonna fight this fight. Like, I got a leaky, closet. I'm gonna not give up. I'm gonna fight this fight. I'm gonna get my, house fixed because I invested in it. But many folks, many of my fellow millennials will avoid that responsibility of paying the high taxes, trying to, refinance, doing, all this adult stuff that we say we want, but then we really don't want it when we turn. It's like, if I got to do appeals, so I'm like, why is my taxes going up? I'm appealing. So I'm that person, not the activist, but like you said, speaking up, going to meetings, causing trouble. I'm on all of my condo association meetings. Like, so what's this new assessment?
Right. And
When are
that's
we doing
exactly
our
right.
appeals? When are we doing our appeals? So I need my money back.
And so, and in all fairness, we're fighting the societal pressure because, this is social media. Social media has you thinking that everyone's on vacation, living a good life, doing
Mhm.
this and everything. And so you have to balance that out. I mean, because of course, who doesn't want to go on vacation, right? But in some cases, it's a situation where like, you have a kid and one hand, you have to sit them down, feed them their vegetables, make them go to school, and they hate it and it's something they're going to begrudge, but you're setting the foundation. On the other hand, you give them all the candy they want, you let them stay up all night. They don't have to do homework if they don't want to. Here's the iPad or the laptop and go nuts, right? You're keeping them appeased in the moment and they're having a great time, but they don't have much of a foundation. So once they get to a certain age, then you're like, why are they making these erratic decisions? Why are they doing these things that don't make any sense? Why are they not being a part of these systems, right? Why are they voting for this person who makes no sense? So part of it is that we have to take responsibility, for that, for ourselves and for folks. And again, that's not a slow process, right? Because this engineering of the society has been years in the making, and so these are dividends that are paying off for the investments that they made when they, started cutting school lunches, when they started removing Pell Grants, right? When they started introducing so much debt into the higher education system. So these are investments that were made over time to get this to this result. If we want to change it, we've got to make equally intentional investments to be able to reverse that. And so part of that is sacrificing, if you will, to get to the home, and figuring out ways to do that, whether it's, we talk about, folks will talk about house hacking and how you can do that, or related living where if you want to stay with your parents, but then get a two flat, right? As opposed to just being in their basement. And then that way, you're able to accomplish that same thing, but build some wealth, in the process. And then the other piece of it is that as we get into these leadership positions, us, as we're moving through, we don't forget this, and we don't forget how to help solve some of these problems, and we don't forget about some of the organizations and people and process that are put in place to help. That we actually reach back and try to find ways to impact that change, to have that responsibility. So I'm a member of the 2017 Leadership Greater Chicago class, right? And one of our models was, or one of our phrases that we came up with was responsibility. And that meant that we had the responsibility to help and the obligation to assist, right? That it wasn't a choice, right? It was something that we've been given and blessed, and we must reach back and we must find ways to impact these communities. And so when we talk about, sort of bringing it full circle, we talk about Rose Capital and what that means. It's that responsibility to help. That's a part of why I formed the company and why I'm fighting so hard to make sure that folks have access to these resources to be successful.
You talked about foundation, and I was, my mom laid the foundation right for me. I followed like in her footsteps as I think about it. She bought a home through NHS. I bought a home through NHS. I saw the investment. I saw the social responsibility, the right thing to do, right? So now I'm like, similar to you, advocating for our folks to like see the investment and, whether it's in real estate or in our communities or home ownership, like trying to educate them as much as possible. Um, this has been a great conversation. I definitely want to, ask this question as we're on, the month of National Homeownership Month, right?
Hmm.
James Truslow, talked about the American dream. Is the American
Hmm.
dream still in reach for Black people, or has it been deferred, Rob Rose?
So I think you have to. Okay, so loaded question, but let me try and answer that. So the American dream, in terms of here is a land where you're able to, through your hard work and gumption and all those terms, you're able to make something of yourself. That dream was always a dream, and I think that dream is still very much alive. I think that if you look at any other country that you go into, where can you come in? and be able to have an opportunity to reinvent yourself, remake yourself, educate yourself to be able to go, to reach the different heights that you can. So from that regard, the American experiment and the American dream is very much alive. If the American dream is the white picket fence and owning a home and that whole thing, I would argue that that dream was actually never the dream, right? For Black Americans, when you look at the boom time for when this country really started owning property, right, went from rural to urban, it was really driven by the policies of the 20s and 30s, and then fueled by the GI Bill, after World War II, we saw this explosion, and we know we were excluded from all of that redlining in the beginning, and then that denial of those GI benefits, or us not having access to the same benefits, being able to buy the house and to get to the college as a result, in the same way as everyone else that was participating in that. And so, right now, we're just 50 years into this thing where the barriers, the real barriers that were there have been lifted. Now we still have barriers there. We still have the appraisal bias and everything. I'm talking about the covert barriers. I'm talking about the fact that they could just say, I'm not selling to you because you're black, right? Those barriers, excuse me, it's argued that it was 1965 when we actually had the start of that. So in many ways, it's been a dream deferred, and we're just now catching up. This is part of what I say, for our ancestors, they wanted to at least have the ability to do that. Now we've got to be willing to make the sacrifice because we have an ability to buy this house. And it may not be the McMansion out here, but it could be a two-bedroom condo, right? It could be this, it could be that. And we've got to be willing to do that and to make that sacrifice and to be a part of that so that we can catch up. Because again, these generations didn't get here overnight. The folks that are living in some of the neighborhoods, that's their parents and their parents' parents, and the ability to pass that world through that got them to that point, and we're trying to catch up in like one generation, right? And we're doing a lot of things where we're living above our means, and we're extending our credit, and we're doing all these things to try and catch up. And it's like, no, let's just live within our means and do what we need to do. We'll get there, right? But we've also got to understand how to do that sustainably and responsibly, right? So right now, there was something on the internet. It was something like, would you rather have 2 million now or $5,000 for the rest of your life? Or it was some one of these things that, sort of choose what it is. And, the it was more of a generational divide, right? Whereas the older folks, and I put myself in that generation, it's like, give me that money now and I can figure out how to invest it and make it work. Whereas some of the younger people are like, hey, I like the stability of having that money, that $5,000 a week. And even if the money didn't add up to the 2 million, I don't ever have to worry about that as I go forward. And it's just different perspectives on it, right? What we've got to do is we've got to stay resolute and say, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to invest in ourselves and our communities. That's the education and that's the assets. And then we're going to participate, right? And doing that, if we did just that as a people, and we really took that as a mantra, we'd be so much better, and so much further ahead, because that means that we will be engaged in our election process. We'd be educated in our election process. And again, whoever you voted for, my thing is make an informed decision, right? All of the people right now that are having these FAFO moments, right? Well, I didn't know. He said he was going to deport criminals. He never said that. He never said only criminals. He said illegals, right? So you've got to listen, and you've got to be informed, and you've got to, go with this, as opposed to just going with the moment or just relying on others for that information. So for me, is the American dream dead? I don't think the dream is dead, but I think that's the promise of the country. I think the application is always in spotty when it comes to us because of these barriers that have been put up. But I think that what we owe ourselves to the dream is that we can't acquiesce to the barriers, right? Our ancestors didn't acquiesce. They still fought. They still got married when they told they couldn't be married. They still figured out how to read when they were told they couldn't read. You know, they figured out how to escape when they were told not to leave, right? So now it's hard to buy a house. That doesn't mean it's impossible. Figure it out and make the sacrifice to do it, right? Um, be a part, be a part of your systems, be a part of what's happening in your communities. Run for that local school board, the local school council. Be actively involved and engaged, and figure out how to do that. Volunteer. You have all these cleanups that are happening in communities. Volunteer and be a part of that, right? Be engaged in your community, and not just to be in it. And that active participation, I think that plays a key role in how we move forward and how we're able to attack that American dream.
Amen. So you're saying be socially responsible. Rob Rose, how can we find you, get in contact with you? Are you mentoring? Are you your consultation being offered through Rob Rose? I'm sorry, through
So my website is rosecapgroup.com, and it has my email and phone number on that. But it also tells you about the services that I provide. So that's the best way to contact me. I'm also on social media, Rose Capital Group, on Facebook, and then on LinkedIn, because there's already a bunch of Rose Capitals. I wasn't able to create my LinkedIn profile, so LinkedIn is just Robert Rose or Rob Rose. So I'm easy to find in that regard, in terms of those that are looking for the services. And then if you follow me on social, then for the workshops that I have coming up, that's where I also post the link for people to be able to register, for those workshops.
and they're free.
And they're free. They're free. The city of Chicago is paying for it. And for me, that's the best thing about it. Right now, I don't begrudge anybody that's charging, and I get it, right? And you talk to Dr. Mullins, and he's being responsible by charging a lower amount, because there is a value to this information. And at the same time, I'm just always so frustrated when people fall for the scams, because people are always willing to try to figure out how to get something for nothing. And that's the base of any scam, is to make convenience costly, and for you to not have to do anything and get money. And that's how the white boys do it, or whatever. And that's not how it's done. Only people that's getting rich are the people that are taking your money when you come to these when you go through those schemes. You can get this information. I mean, YouTube University is real to be able to get to this information. There are tons of resources and tons of groups that are offering these different talks and workshops around town. But it's a part of what we've been saying, which is there's a certain sort of sacrifice and dedication you got to have to the craft. And when you do that, you'll find that you'll be rewarded in spades. But to the extent you try to shortcut that, that's where you're going to have issues, where you run into problems, where you run into scams, because you're trying to shortcut a process that was never designed to be a short process. Real estate was never designed for a get rich quick scheme. It was always about buying at the right price in the right location, adding value, getting the cash flow if you're doing, if it's an investment, and then gaining appreciation over time, right? And building that up over time. And it wasn't designed for you to get in today, flip it out, and go out to the next thing and flip it out, and that's drug dealer mentality, trying to flip, flip, flip. I get that. And there's certain opportunities where you can flip, but as a business, you really have to have a portfolio where there's some flipping, where the opportunity allows for itself some cash flow, where it goes from it to take advantage of the tax depreciation and some of those things. But to build a portfolio, that's where that 3 and 5 year plan come into play, to say, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, and that's where it says, hey, I'm real estate for the long haul. And again, most people will find out that that's not what they're looking to do, and just buy 1 or 2 properties and have it as a side hustle. And on the weekends, you go and cut the grass on your 1 or 2 properties, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Just be honest with yourself.
Rob Rose, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Will you come back?
I will. I will. This is my second time back, so.
You don't need, I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge. I put it out there. We're going to write a book together.
All right, I'll take you up on that.
I'm so serious. I told you on that tour that you're going to be my mentor. You don't like titles. I'm just going to keep showing up like at all your classes, like, hey, thank you, Rob Rose. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. You take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Someone You Need to Know. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the podcast on all major platforms and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Rashana B, for more inspiring stories. Until next time, keep shining, keep building, and keep making the world a better place, one story at a time.